Before starting to watch episode 4, I wanted to offer some reflections about a central question. Why did Jaime do it? Thousands, millions of 13-year-old boys around the world get teased, get harassed, get shamed, get provoked, and they don't stab someone to death. A girl their own age. They don't do it. Why did Jaime do it? What are the forces within him that led him to that? And a framework for understanding that is a really good one from clinical psychology and also healthcare that looks at the whys falling into three categories, essentially. The challenges that are landing on someone, the vulnerabilities they penetrate through and really impact, and also the resources outside the person and inside the person that they can draw on to deal with their challenges. So here we see Jaime being very challenged by teenage hormones, by being teased, by being, subordinated and low status. And then a major trigger comes along. This girl he likes rejects him and even knocks him to the ground. He's challenged. What are the vulnerabilities those challenges, among others, are landing on? Well, there are both heritable vulnerabilities and acquired vulnerabilities. Heritable has to do with what's kind of baked into an individual's DNA from the start. And in his case, there's the average is roughly about a third of the factors, the causes that affect who people develop to become are heritable on average, and about 2/3 have to do with their environment and what they do inside their own minds as a combination. Now, certain things are very affected by what's heritable, and other things, let's say, are very affected for an individual by what happened in the environment. This is a way clinicians can think about this as they start forming a kind of diagnostic formulation about what's going on, which then leads onward to what to do about it. So in Jaime's case, it's possible that he was genetically more vulnerable to sociopathy, a lack of empathy, an over-focus on his immediate desires. Maybe he is genetically vulnerable to poor impulse control, in addition to whatever else is in the mix for a typical 13-year-old boy. These are vulnerabilities that may have been in his own background. And then as a person, he grows up in certain environments in which vulnerabilities get acquired. If you are repeatedly shamed and devalued, you're no good, get out of here, again and again and again. If you're on the receiving end of a lot of contempt and exclusion and rejection and exile from other people, particularly your peers, that builds up vulnerabilities to the next episode of that kind of rejection and shaming. That's an acquired vulnerability over time. So, okay, that's in the mix, and I think we could see in Jaime that he built up a major pile underlying of feeling shamed and his own rage about all that. And then resources. What kind of resources were around him or inside him? Here he is in his school environment, with the exception of one particular teacher who's talking with Kate's best friend. This history teacher is clueless, doesn't really care, doesn't really want to do a good job. The head administrator woman has no idea about major aspects of the culture that these kids are living, breathing, growing and dying in. And then we have other teachers who are just yelling at students, really intensely. Not a very emotionally intelligent environment in terms of resources, not any sense whatsoever of the real life of these kids, including the focus on the whole notion of being an incel, involuntarily celibate, because, you're in the 80% of the boys that girls just don't like and are not attracted to. And then, Jaime's family, it's unclear there. Seems like a loving, caring father. Mother's kind of hard to figure out. Maybe benevolent, basically not abusive, but, no deep training in this family about self-compassion or self-awareness or regulating yourself or, how to build up self-worth in the face of attacks on it. None of that sort of stuff's going on. And Jaime himself, just poor kid, you reflect on that last episode with the psychologist coming in to do an evaluation. Does Jaime have the cognitive capacity to be convicted of a crime and sentenced as a result? Does he understand right and wrong? Does he understand what he did? Even in that situation in which that psychologist, at least in my view, was often awkward with him and confrontational and the rest of that, when she says, "Okay, we're done, I'm leaving now," oh, don't go. This kid is so alone and lonely. He's even clinging to this person with whom he had a very adversarial relationship. Don't go, come back. It's wrenching. And here's Jaime alone inside his own mind. His father seems like a nurturing figure. Maybe there's an internalized sense of the father. Other than that, who's on his side, even inside himself? Not many resources there. So here we have a very demanding, challenging situation with a recent, potent, powerful trigger and vulnerabilities that are built up in him, perhaps laid on top of innate vulnerabilities to impulsivity. And then, boom, very few resources outside or inside for dealing with that. And then in that whole mix, we have Kate, poor Kate. Yeah, she was caught up in shaming him. She was part of the whole social hierarchy process, often in which people whose position socially in the hierarchy, their status position is precarious. One way they manage precarity of their social standing is to join in the pack, the mob that then is attacking pariahs or scapegoats to preserve their own position, joining in. Maybe some of that was in the mix. In any case, whatever her part was, teasing him, shaming him, pushing him to the ground, none of that called for his response to her, including his intent to come to see her with a knife to scare her, to lower her down so then she would want to go with him on a date. And none of it was justified. And in almost all cases, when things happen to the Jaimes, they don't go out and murder a classmate. That's on Jaime. That's on Jaime. Definitely not on Kate. So I'm eager to see in the fourth episode now how they probably sort of bring it all together and help us understand even more deeply, what was it like? What is it like to be Jaime? And of course, what is it like to be the other key people here, ranging for sure from the psychologist in the last episode to Jaime's family and Kate's. There are no accidents in this show, and they're really showing things deliberately. So we start with the father who's in the shed that he tore down angrily, which he then rebuilt. So there's a theme of repair here. And then as he closes the door, he glances sadly at a bicycle, probably Jaime's bicycle, hung up there.
Sure, I'm sleep till 12 on his dad's 50th. Lisa, come on, be good. Be good.
And then he comes into the house and we see appropriate sexuality enacted here, male desire, female boundary, male acceptance of the boundary, coming together. They're a married couple, they're a couple, period, and demonstrating ways of being that look good, look fine.
Your dad and Jean. Written by Jean.
So a birthday card from his father and apparently his stepmother, calling her by her given name, Jean. And the card is written by gene, not by his father. And it is actually the case that very often it is females, probably girls certainly as well as women, who on average carry the bulk of the emotional traffic, the emotional or relationship tasks among people, including in family systems. And so here we have the stepmother writing the birthday card to her stepson, and his own father, who is not involved. And this was a real topic of inquiry, of course, from the psychologist in the previous episode. What's your relationship with your father, and what's his relationship with his father, and what's the generational transmission here of gendering. And so here we have a very disengaged grandfather, emotionally disengaged, certainly not nurturing and attentive, thinking about Jaime wanting to feel that he's held in the awareness of other people and they like him. That's his cry du coeur, the cry of his heart. With the psychologist in the previous episode, do you like me? Do you like me? And here we have his own father, who probably did not get very much nurturance himself as a boy, who now has been trying, as best I can see in the series so far, to be nurturing in his way. But how many resources does he have, does this father have, coming from his own background, that he can bring to bear with his kids? And it's, of course, important to realize that many people have lacked good fathering or good mothering, good parenting in general. And then as they grow up, they repair those wounds and they take in experiences of the good that lasts inside, that they can grow inside themselves. And even though something was really lacking, let's say in their own upbringing, they can still grow a lot of that themselves. In principle, they're able to do that.
Oh, it's a lovely picture. It's made you look handsome.
It's good, isn't it?
The mom, 13 months later, by the way, seems so much more together and nurturing, including, tracking the effort that Jaime made, unlike this father's father, to, draw a picture, make him look handsome for his own birthday card. And I find myself wondering, how she has grown. People can grow from trauma. What has been her own journey of developing herself, including how have they grown as a couple, strengthening their relationship. The affection between them seems very palpable, completely missing in the earlier scenes with them. There's hope. There is repair, there is growth, there is opportunity alongside, of course, many other things.
Did you see anything, Eileen?
No, nothing, Eddie.
No, you didn't see a thing, no.
Sorry, love, it's been quiet this morning.
So here we have another shaming attack and a sense of mistrust with the neighbors, wondering if the neighbors also see this family in some guilt by association sort of way. And what is it like for them to be living in an environment in which they don't feel welcome, and in fact they feel like they could be subject to an attack, and there's definitely not protection. There's no neighborhood watch going on here as far as they're concerned. So we see this theme again, the power of our social environment and in the ways that it really affects us, and how these people are really trying to deal with that.
Want a cup of tea? No, I'm all right. Okay. I love you. I love you too.
So, of course, here we have two women, mother and daughter, definitely communicating much more warmly and overtly, I love you too, between themselves. It's harder to imagine Eddie, the father, communicating with Jaime and vice versa in that way. It's impossible to imagine Eddie and his father, the grandfather, communicating with each other in that way. They could still love each other, perhaps, but it's really different when it's held back and not expressed. Nonce in British slang means sexual predator, sexual pervert, convicted sex offender. Very shaming, like incel, nonce, ethnic derogatory terms. There's an old line, sticks and stones can, break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's completely untrue. Words in important relationships, such as in groups or in neighborhoods in this case, words can have an incredible effect, including on the brain, stress chemistry, our immune system. People can literally curl up and die because of the words that are hurled at them, such as knots. So he's scanning in all directions. The next attack at night or during the day could come from any direction, vulnerable, exposed, deeply offensive to him as a person and a man, even if he wipes it off. Somehow I'm thinking of Lady Macbeth, out, damn spot. But even if he gets it off, it could be put back. How does he deal with that?
I'm just interested in solving the problem of today.
And I'm helping.
Thank you.
Solving the problem of today? That's what the therapist has been saying.
Aha. Seeing a couples counselor. And it looks good so far. I mean, they're parroting, but with some irony and humor, a key piece of advice: solve the problem of today, stay in the present, work together. She's helping him solve the problem of today. I would immediately start thinking about him as someone who's really keyed up, gets angry quickly, but wants to solve problems. My profession, he's a plumber. He fixes the crud, so it works. And when he can't, it really gets to him. And so framing her as a helper in that process, or him important, valuing her and acknowledging her important role. I mean, he's still sliding in to a lot of ordering her about, bossing her around, being really intense, kind of getting in her face, being demanding and commanding, not perfectly, egalitarian or cooperative, but, in the frame of their background, his culture, her culture, what they're doing is certainly a lot better than how it used to be. And maybe that's been a positive influence over the 13 months since the original crime that we're now seeing here, which would be something like 6 months after the encounter between the psychologist and Jaime there in the last episode. They're doing better. They're doing better. And it does go to the ways in which, on average, therapy does tend to be pretty effective for people, including in durable ways. Not for everybody, and very effective for some people, but on average, definitely, typically pretty good results. And we're seeing, I think, some of the benefits of that here.
He wore this Daft Punk wig, and everyone was laughing at him, but your dad never cares when people laughed at him.
Hey, I love that wig.
Wow, that's so interesting. Your dad never cared when people laughed at him. Jaime obviously really cares about people not laughing at him. Sometimes it happens that we ourselves are not vulnerable to certain kinds of reactions. We're not affected. It doesn't bother us. We don't have that issue. And then sometimes, because that's the water we swim in, we don't yet take into account that other people, including potentially our own child, are different from us. And they have to take into account those things. And, as a parent, certainly I've just kind of taken it for granted that something wouldn't be a problem, from one of our kids. And, oh yeah, it really was. and there are things that for me are a problem that are not a problem for other people. And sometimes they just don't understand why it's a problem for me. And so it makes me wonder here about, again, this gulf of understanding between Jaime and others, the ways in which Jaime has felt alone and unsupported and lonely inside, and some of the causes of that, including just being different from maybe his father, and his father really not understanding how much it would bother Jaime to be laughed at, or in the case of Jaime playing football and his father being disappointed and turning away in shame, in effect, from Jaime not being a great athlete, dad not realizing how much that would affect his kid.
Your son's side, for what it's worth. Because, he didn't do it, did he? I mean, even the stab wounds, well, where they said there were stab wounds, there's bone in the penetration spots.
Ay, what a crazy maker. I believe that the father knows that Jaime did it, and it's his nightmare, of course. On his birthday, he gets shamed, and wherever he goes, it keeps coming up again. And then we have the young man who's sympathetic based on, the kind of disinformation and misinformation and complete caca that proliferates in the internet. And people who want to believe that kind of thing and want to turn away from legacy media, mainstream media with nonetheless its imperfections, they find those silos where they believe that stuff. And maybe some of the motivation here is that he, allies with Jaime as someone sticking up for incel young men, and he's a young man himself. What do you do with someone who is just, a sane, rational person who's, the frank term is delusional? It's not a bizarre delusion like, my, I don't know what, my grandmother lives inside my ear. Okay, that's a bizarre delusion, but it's delusional to think that the kind of stuff he's saying is actually true. And what do we do? What do we do with people who have an encapsulated delusion in a particular area that has a lot of effect, including when other people share that kind of delusion in our society? I mean, the foundation of living together is to tell the truth and play fair. That's foundational. And if you can, have compassion, but minimally tell the truth, play fair, stand in the truth. And how do we live together with people who are not committed to actual reality? And even if they're committed, maybe in this case, to being fair, rules for you are rules for me, rights for me are rights for you, okay. But still, if there's this gaping gulf, here's another gulf. I've tuned into the gulf between Jaime and his son, between people in this series. Now we have a different kind of a gulf. What do we do with a gulf that's about, shared understanding of reality? And yet it's not shared. And that creates that gulf there. It's a serious, serious problem, which is why, my own personal 2 cents is that it's critically important to be straightforward about what's factually true and to really protect and support people, scientists, journalists, credible sources who are devoted to clarifying and identifying what is actually true and then sharing it with other people.
Don't laugh at me. Go on, fuck off. Stay away from my family.
So that's assault. That's a big adult, knocking a kid to the ground, attacking him physically. That's assault. There's no way around it. And it's really important to not normalize that, even though obviously Eddie, so many pressures on him, so many pressures in him. And, can have certainly tons of compassion for him while recognizing that's assault. It's not okay. And it's also not in his own best interest to do that kind of thing with echoes taken to obviously a great extreme of what his own son did. So Eddie's had it up to here, so upset. He loves his van, and he's still this careful person. He's throwing blue paint all over it, including over his windows, reminds me a little bit of him tearing down his tool shed. And then he suddenly, shocking, what happened? An eruption. Somewhat like, Jaime's eruption. And here it's his wife and daughter. Two women are now trapped inside a small physical space with a very angry man. Jaime said he certainly has never hit Jaime. We haven't heard anything about Eddie being violent with his wife and daughter. Got it. And still, what's it like for these two women here to be stuck in this confined space with this man? And most men do not lose their temper like Eddie is here. Most men, for example, thinking about the psychologist in the previous episode, in the elevator in the very beginning of the episode, stuck again in that very confined space. Most men they're not inappropriate. If anything, they're benevolent, and they're even attentive potentially to what it could be like for women who have to live with the possibility that this strange man, or even a man they've known their own life, their father or husband, could lose control. And if he does, there's nothing they can do about it physically. He's too big and too strong. Nothing they can do. What's that like for them?
Dad, I'm going to change my play.
So painful for all three of them, of course. And interesting that they did not address the thing the son wanted to say, which is he's changing his plea. I don't know the British legal system and what the consequences of that might be, especially for a juvenile, though I imagine that he's talking with his lawyer. It's complicated. But they don't follow up. They don't ask him about that. They don't pursue it. They don't challenge him. They tellingly do not dispute his claim that he's guilty. They don't push back on it whatsoever. I think because they know all along, yeah, he did do it. And they're trying to integrate. How in the world do you integrate as a parent and a big sister that your kid brother, your kind of beautiful, sweet, goofy, funny son stabbed a girl to death in a moment of just rage? How do you integrate that with what a sweet kid who suffers, gets picked on, has food intolerances, gets an upset stomach, likes lifting muscles, starting to draw, has some talent as an artist? How do you hold all that together? And that's so often the challenge, or a key challenge, with another person or with ourselves. How do we allow the truth to land? I talked about recognizing truth earlier. How do we allow the truth to land of all of who we are and all of who another person is? We don't have to like all the parts or approve of all the parts. We may need to protect ourselves. The father, he's got a lot of anger there. There's a place to protect yourself from it. And can we see the other parts as well? And how do we, help ourselves expand the field of our awareness so that we see the whole mosaic of another person and see the whole mosaic of ourselves? And come to terms, for example, with the parts of ourselves that can get really angry. I've had to come to terms with those parts of myself. I'm not physically aggressive, but I have a capacity to be very pointed if I'm really mad. And all right, what do we do with that part? In my case, I try to be aware of it and prevent things from building up, and get a sense of the early signs and remind myself to, stay between the lines. The point being, if we're not aware of and accepting and compassionate toward and including of these parts, they build up. And for me, a lot of this show is really about, in a way, Freud's haunting phrase, the return of the repressed. things building up and then breaking through. And what can we do about that? For the sake of others and for our own sake too.
I didn't want to believe it. But I'm sorry.
There are many kinds of trauma. I think what we're seeing here for Eddie the father is trauma. The shock of the police barging in, the arrest process. By the way, I'm not saying that the wife and mother's, Amanda, is not traumatized too. I'm just imagining my way into Eddie here. Trauma. He was traumatized, and seeing his son stab someone to death, I think was really traumatic for him. He's talking about it sticking in his head. He saw the tape. Traumatizing to him to see that and be so upset, and traumatizing for his knowing of the lifetime consequences for his 13-year-old son, including his own, probably, remorse and guilt in the mix, somehow woven in to what his son did to this poor, vulnerable, innocent girl, Kate. Remorse and guilt are often woven in, and shame. So here we have again the shame, ashamed of his son, not just missing a kick in soccer or football, but ashamed of his son for being a murderer. Shame mixed in with sorrow and grief and anger and helplessness and outrage. Traumatized. I have a friend and someone I've learned a lot from, Paul Gilbert, the creator of compassion-focused therapy. He's a totally world-class, top-tier academic in the UK. And he works a lot with people who are dealing with a lot of shame, I believe in some cases in prison settings. And he said to me once that what he tries to do with people, in part, is to help them move from shame to sorrow, from shame to grief, including grief about the impact on others of their own behavior sometimes. I'm not seeing very much sorrow here. I'm seeing a lot of shame, seeing a lot of anger, very little sorrow. And in the mother, I'm seeing sorrow. I'm not seeing shame. I'm not hearing about it or seeing anger. Gender roles, women tend to get socialized to move more into sorrow than anger. And still, it makes me wonder about her movement into just facing it, seeing it, and having a simple, straightforward grief about it all. While then, loving her husband, enjoying what is really sweet and cool about him, and raising her nearly 18-year-old daughter. Perhaps how it is landing with her does speak to the value of letting it flow and moving toward sorrow and not keeping shame and anger bottled up.
Well, that popped up on my phone, going on about how to treat women and how men should be men and all that shit. I was only looking for something for the gym, wasn't I? You can't keep an eye on them all the time, love. We just can't.
As a parent and as an adult educator, or anyone who has a caring or caregiving relationship with a teenager, aunt, uncle, extended family, older sibling, it's really important to do what you can to understand the world they live in. And there are different opinions about how to parent, and people have different views. And my own view is that we fundamentally have a duty to our children to keep them safe. And that duty to their safety can trump their autonomy, if need be. Now, managing that skillfully is really artful, and I certainly have not always managed it skillfully. But fundamentally, to keep our kids safe from the toxic influences in the culture medium, as Gabor Mate was talking about it, to keep our kids safe from those toxic influences, whether it's in the culture broadly. Eddie the dad gives an example now. He's just scrolling through gym stuff, and the algorithm is pulling up stuff as kind of he's implying right out of the manosphere, telling him, how men should be men. So, that stuff's everywhere. But in addition to that, that kind of messaging, think about the toxic culture commonly in a high school or a junior high, or these days going all the way down to 5th or 4th grade. So if we're to protect our kids from that toxic culture, we need to know a fair amount of what's in it. And one of the keys there, of course, is to maintain bridges of communication and flow and intimacy, and insist from time to time, if need be, look, I need to know what you're into. And I'm willing to give you basically a deal where I will totally support the adolescents' autonomy, as long as you give me credible reassurance of your safety. As long as I know you're safe, the field in which you're safe your autonomy will grow to be as large as the field in which you are truly safe. And that guideline, I think, is really useful. You also see here people doing what people do, me included, which is to review what happened and to explore it. And the narrative, the account, the story of what happened will evolve over time. Different aspects will start moving more to the front. Others will fade to the back. And it's a natural process. The question, of course, is to what extent is it productive? Is it useful to go through it and kind of rehash things or revisit things or feel them again? And on the other hand, feel them again on their way to a release and on their way to insight. Or on the other hand, is revisiting and rehashing and working it over and over again. Is that a form of ruminating? Doing laps around the rumination track, digging it deeper, reinforcing it, including neurologically, every time you go around. And sometimes you don't exactly know. You got to go a few times around the track to realize, oh yeah, I'm just lapping here, round and round I go. I can't tell here yet. This is really fresh. I mean, it's 13 months since the original event, 6 months since the episode with the psychologist there. Sounds like he hasn't even come to a formal trial yet in terms of a judgment, guilty or innocent, and then a sentencing process. They've been dealing with this for a long time, but still, sometimes things take years to fully process through and move to the other side. Along the way, though, it's really useful to ask yourself, is this useful? Is this moving me forward? Are things flowing, or am I just getting stuck even more deeply, including maybe with another person?
But I do sometimes think we should have stopped it. Seen it and stopped it.
I so feel for these people. I've known so many people who are these people. Different stories, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. I know my own version of this, and wow. So just to highlight something that stands out for me here, it's the difference between whether we cause something and or whether we have some responsibility to do something about it. So the parents here did not cause the incel propaganda. They didn't cause it. They didn't cause the social dynamics of adolescence these days that are heavily weighted in social media for most adolescents, certainly in more technically oriented countries, probably increasingly around the entire world. They didn't cause it. Maybe they didn't cause Jaime's temper. Maybe, as I said previously, there was a heritability component, a genetic aspect to it. Okay. Maybe his circumstances as a young kid, before he even entered school, and then the first few years before he became a teenager, maybe that had an impact on him that caused it. Suppose they didn't cause it. And yet, as parents and as adults with kids in general, it's our responsibility to do something about it, to do that something which is skillful. I think unlike the psychologist in that scene who maybe had a different job to do in terms of determining whether Jaime had the cognitive capacity to recognize guilt, okay, but she definitely did not maintain rapport with him. And without that rapport, it's extremely difficult to have any real influence, especially these days, over the inner life of a teenager. So there's skillfulness. in taking responsibility and doing something about a condition that's a problematic condition involving someone you care about, even though you didn't cause it.
We can't take like that.
In effect, Eddie is saying we can't blame ourselves for what happened. We can't take any kind of responsibility for what happened here. Now, maybe that's in part a way for him to push away the traumatic, haunting imagery of his son committing murder. Additionally, it's a common defensive reaction. Close the chapter, shit happens, move on. And sometimes that's effective coping, especially when it's all you can do. On the other hand, to be truly free of the past, we're doomed to repeat it if we don't understand it. There's some kind of quotation about history like that. To move toward, as I think the mother is moving toward, an integrated understanding of what happened, what's called in attachment theory about her own childhoods, a coherent narrative, a full account of all the parts of it. And all the parts of it include the choices that their parents made. They didn't push open the door and insist on talking with their son at 1 a.m. or the following morning after a good breakfast. They didn't seek professional help before this. They didn't look out there, whatever. They yelled at him themselves. The son saw the father being a, pretty physically powerful, maybe tough kind of person. You saw how he interacted with the people in the store and the neighbors. So, maybe they had some causal influence, in the 100 factors, let's say, that led Jaime to do what he did that night. Maybe their name is on 10 of them. And there's a freedom when we accept and face our own responsibility, whatever it is, our own causal influence, and a willingness to face our own causal influence makes it possible to look hard at certain situations and say, I had not on me. I did not cause any of that. I have no responsibility for any of that. But to get to that authentically and morally legitimately, it requires a willingness to discern responsibility if it's actually the case. And so I would say for myself, and definitely I think for many people, that willingness to engage in what I think they call in Alcoholics Anonymous a fearless and searching inventory. You don't have to be alcoholic to engage in a fearless and searching inventory, which includes the pluses in addition to the minuses in the total package of all the ways that they interacted with their son over the years. Being able to engage in that inventory here is really, I think, what the mother is saying, and it's hard for the dad to face. Maybe it's not his style, it's not his gender socialization. And still, looking hard at that part is freeing. It's a truth that sets us free.
I'm not better.
You tried to be. We both did.
So she doesn't give him full reassurance. Trying is not the same as a heartfelt, full-throated statement. Yes, you're not like your father. Amazing that you're not like your father. So many men who are treated like your father treated you as a boy turn out to be like their own fathers. You didn't. Good for you. I love you so much for that. I don't know why she's withholding that. Maybe in her mind, his expressions of bossiness and anger and domineeringness in some ways that we've seen, maybe that's in her mind. And I think here also about the times where another person is asking us for a gift of our truth-telling. Well, if it's actually true that he does not hit his kids, why is she withholding that gift? And sometimes there's something that comes over us when other people ask for subtler, softer gifts, like acknowledgement. Hey, what'd you think of my so-and-so? They're asking for that. Or other people pulling for one doable step of greater closeness. Can you understand what I'm saying here? Will you just sit with me for a little moment here? Will you just listen to me without interrupting for a minute in a row? It's a pretty small ask often, and it can be sometimes so difficult to give it, and yet so powerful and so valuable when we do. I'm feeling here the haunting echoes of Jaime's plea. Do you like me? Do you like me? Am I likable? And here he is also asking for reassurance. Am I good? Am I a good man? He doesn't know for sure inside. In part, that's why he's really seeking that reassurance to fill that empty, hollow, aching place inside.
I just stood there on the side of the pitch while all the other dads were laughing at him. And then the business took off, didn't it? So, I'd have to leave at 6 and I wouldn't get back till 8.
So speaking of gifts, when Jaime was bad at football and the other dads were laughing at him, that goes to some of what I was saying about external resources. I don't know all kinds of situations, but I think my personal experience of youth athletics, and I never saw ever dads laughing at a kid who was inept in the sports. Like, what? So clearly, whatever the setting they're describing, not full of social resources, support to help kids deal with challenges and vulnerabilities. Just flagging that. And then additionally, here's Jaime. He's failing. He idolizes his dad. His dad, it seems like a sporty, athletic, burly fellow, manly man. And here's Jaime, not being any good. And he wants reassurance. He's pulling for that gift. And his dad couldn't give him that gift. And feels terrible now, many, many years later, about it. The other thing just to note right here is that here's the dad. He has to get up at 6 in the morning, return at 8, right? That's a 14-hour day. And that's what he needed to do to fulfill his role in the economic system that he's living in. That's what he has to do to make enough money to buy his kid that computer, and eventually now enable his daughter to go to college, to maintain a home and so on. And he too was sucked into conditions and pushed by forces beyond his control. He's not responsible for them. And yet those forces really made it difficult for him to maintain an intimacy with his own son at turning points in his son's life.
I was a good mom.
She was.
I am a good mom. You're a good dad, a great dad.
Yay! Flagging. When I grew up, danger was out in the world. And even then, the 1950s, early 60s, there wasn't that much danger. Certainly, and I grew up in ordinary middle class, lower middle class, suburban community, Southern California. These days, though, the external world may well be less safe, and yet danger comes through the screen, inside a bedroom with the door locked, on a phone, a screen. So much threat, so much danger for our kids these days. So important to recognize. And of course, these parents didn't know. They didn't know, but we know now where danger comes.
How did we make it here, eh?
Same way we made him.
You can feel them coming to terms with their influence on the one hand, and finding their way into, as she suggests, acknowledging some responsibility with the remorse, the guilt, the grief, moving potentially to some forgiveness of themselves and each other, which involves not just processing the bad, but recognizing the good as well, as he does when he affirms her as a really great mom, and she really comes through for him and gives him that gift he's been asking for. Really sincerely, he was a great dad in a lot of ways, alongside some unfortunate missing elements. And then also, when they think about their daughter, they're the same parents, basically. Sure, people treat their kids a little differently. Maybe gender has something of a role in that. But beyond all that, you start to realize when you are a parent, and also when you work with families, kids start constructing who they are from a very, very early age. And also, many, many forces and currents, many influences are moving through their world, also from a very, very, very young age, that are not the parents' fault. They're not the parents' responsibility, and often the parents have no control. They have no influence there. Things happen they don't even know about, little moments or processes inside the kid's mind. It's complex. And here they have an opportunity to realize that, so much, probably the great majority actually, of the influences that shape who our kids become by the time they're 13, let alone 18. The majority of those do not involve the parents. Parents can do what they can to influence those other influences, help the kid be in a good setting, think about who they're with, pay attention to toxic culture. But so much of it is out of our hands. And so it's both shocking to realize how little influence we often have, which then can help us move to a certain acceptance and peace about how things turn out, since most of it is not our fault, which then opens the space for really focusing on the handful of things, the short list of what we actually have influence over.
I'm sorry, son.
For whatever it's worth, I've tried to share my responses to some of the complexities in this series and perspectives on them. And amidst all the complexities, just what I'm really left with right now is just a feeling of the suffering and compassion. Compassion for the father, the mother, the sister, and Jaime. Compassion for Kate, her family. It's interesting how much they're left out, really. We've seen a couple of pictures of Kate. Seems about it. This might have been a different show if there had been more of that. Maybe it should have been more of that. In any case, I just feel a lot of compassion, feeling for the pain, the struggle, the loss, the burden, the tough stuff to deal with, the external forces, culture, economy, everything. Generational. Eddie's father, the trauma he experienced again and again, that's physical trauma. I have a duty to report. If I hear that Eddie's being hit by his father like that, I have to call Child Protective Services, and I have, including things that mothers have done to their children as well. In any case, wow, compassion. And sometimes amidst all the complexity, all the theorizing, there's a lot of narrative about this show and points of view about it and pro and con and all the rest of that. People are hurting. We're hurting. I'm hurting. I have hurt. I do hurt. I will hurt. You too. People are hurting. And in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, we can have compassion, including for those we oppose or disapprove of or disagree with. We can see other parts of the mosaic of reality or their life in addition to their pain, even if they've caused their own pain in some ways. Cutting through controversies and spin, the politics of it all. We can have compassion.